All right. Thank you all for being here, for coming back. And this is now starting the Artist Focus panel. My name is Reagan Smith, General Counsel of the Copyright Office. And one thing that unites everyone in this room is the love for music. No matter your taste, each of us can immediately bring to mind the songs that have inspired, uplifted, or comforted, and added truth and meaning to our lives. The Music Modernization Act and the Copyright Office's policy study must always keep at the top of the mind how the changes in the law will impact the creators who write this music, and I'm very excited for this next discussion. We wanted to have a more informal discussion focused on creators' perspectives as part of today's symposium. So I'm very pleased to welcome an impressive group of songwriters and artists for this next panel. We are very honored to have Roseanne Cash, a preeminent singer-songwriter and country music royalty, with us today. She has released 15 albums that have earned 4 Grammy Awards, 12 nominations, was awarded the SAG-AFTRA Lifetime Achievement Award, inducted to the Nashville Songwriters Hall of Fame, among many, many other accolades. She is a best-selling author and a longtime advocate for musicians and songwriters. Joining her is Ivan Barrios, a music producer, songwriter, and engineer who has won several songwriting and production awards, a 3-time Grammy nominee, and who has been recognized by ASCAP for his work as a songwriter. In addition to his many musical achievements, Ivan has also established a nonprofit educational initiative to teach high school students music production and songwriting in partnership with the Philadelphia School District. And our third songwriter is Alex Delicata, a multi-platinum and Grammy-nominated music producer, songwriter, and instrumentalist who has produced, co-produced, and co-written songs for a who's who of the music industry, including Beyonce, Rihanna, and Meek Mill. Joining us on the panel to guide this conversation with us is Aaron McAnally. Aaron comes from a family of musicians and has been a music professional for over 15 years, including in production, music supervision, and scoring. And among other things, Aaron works with the Artists' Rights Alliance to help educate musicians about the legal and business issues vital to their success. So we're thrilled to have you all today. And Aaron, why don't you start this conversation off to help talk about what's important from a creator's perspective.
Thank you so much, Reagan, and thank you so much to the Copyright Office and to all of you for having us here. We're thrilled that this discussion is happening and that artists' voices are being heard. So a lion's share of the Music Modernization Act, obviously, is primarily focused on revamping the mechanical licensing system and royalties for payment. I'd like to talk about how streaming is changing the nature of how and how much songwriters get paid. So, Roseanne, you're experiencing the rise of streaming is sort of maybe in contrast to the way that it's operated for songwriters in the past. But you also are very involved in the younger generation through your children and through the amazing work that you do for artists. Can you speak to the differences in the sort of generational views on how streaming is affecting creators?
Yeah, a bit. Well, when I started, it was all brick and mortar, and you made a vinyl record, and somebody had it in their hand, and they got to read liner notes, and it was much easier to credit people for their work, for songwriters and session players and producers. And then, the rise of compact disc, and then into the digital economy. And I think in the same way that I lost track of how to make analog records and have my hand on a board and move faders and cut tape, which I was all interested in. I took engineering manuals home at night from the studio. I was fascinated by this process, and it was a very visceral process with real objects, and you felt you were making a sonic sculpture. So when that went away and we moved into Pro Tools and making records digitally, the learning curve got too steep for me, and I lost all of that tactile feeling and pleasure of making records. So at the same time, I had to adjust my thinking to how I was getting paid. It all became very vague to me, and I think it did to a lot of us. And there was no way to ascertain where the money was going, whether there was a standard for how we were paid, whether things were transparent. It's like the major labels had equity in streaming companies. What did that mean? How much was in the black box? Was there a tier to how they paid people? And a lot of this was just nebulous. You didn't know how to figure it out. So at the same time that was happening, we were still attached to this idea of artists and musicians being not business types. Somebody else will take care of it. Well, somebody else did take care of it, and it all went into their pockets. So a lot of the companies, the digital streaming platforms, they're not music companies, they're tech companies. It's not a judgment, it's different than the way it used to be. And a lot of times I say that doing this work, and I'm on the board of the Artists' Rights Alliance, and I've been on boards of other organizations and been active in this. I feel sometimes that I'm helping plant a garden I will never see bloom. But that's okay. It's really important. In the same way that in the women's suffrage music, there was a suffrage movement, there was an entire generation of women who died without seeing their work come to fruition, that they didn't get the vote. In this same way, it may take a generation for us to follow the breadcrumbs back and find out how the system started when digital platforms came in, and figure out how to remedy it, and so that artists are paid fairly. And there's just one more thing I say. I know I'm talking a lot, but it's the only business where a creator, her work can be appropriated or told that it's enough to have exposure of your work. Exposure doesn't pay the rent. And young artists are suffering. I've seen many leave the business because they could not pay the rent, or they're selling CDs out of the back of their car, It's not a fair way to live. And if we lose them, we lose an entire generation of creative people. And we are in the service industry of the heart and soul, and we desperately need them.
Ivan, in your work with in your work with independent creators as well, what is the sense that you get from the younger generation about how they're viewing streaming royalties?
Well, they see this as a twofold issue where when you look at the way records are consumed and the way the artists monetize their music, they look at the value of what they're creating in terms of copyright seems to be more robust when you look at the sound recording and the compositional rights as opposed to the mechanical rights, because there's a couple of issues come to mind. One is that there isn't that much money in terms of mechanical royalties from the streaming platforms, and the other is they don't know. And when you look at the plethora of creators, I believe Spotify ingests something like 30,000 tracks a day, or is it albums? I'm not exactly sure, but when you really look at the volume of music that's being ingested, you can look at the cultural and generational aspect and see how many younger creators are being part of the democratic process of releasing music. And a lot of them don't really know. They're not indoctrinated with the models that existed prior to them and being in the industry like we are now, where there were more barriers of entry that force you to become indoctrinated and know about all of the different ways you have to be able to monetize your content. So they view platforms like Spotify and Tidal and Apple Music as a means to an end when it comes to promoting yourself and looking at it as another way of generating additional revenue streams outside of those platforms. So it's starting to become the idea is that music is becoming a lost leader for a lot of them because they can't see the value in terms of dollars and cents based on how minuscule those returns are.
For sure. Alex, along those lines, can you speak to the state of affairs when it comes to creators and mechanicals? And do you know many people who are solely songwriters?
Yeah, so I think it's interesting. Ivan brings up a great point. The streaming services, I think, have made it, a great time in a lot of ways to be an artist, in the sense that while money isn't the same, you can be in your basement when you're 17 years old and being totally creative, and you can get your music out there to anybody, which is something that I think is really powerful, and technology has given us a great ability to do that. But if you're not an artist, if you're just a songwriter, it's an incredibly difficult time to be in the music business, because again, the streams of income have changed so much so that I was sort of on the cusp when I started my career of streaming. I think I had my first top 40 record in 2010. And on that record, we sold, I think, 5 million hard copy albums. And, that's significant income for people writing album cuts. If you don't have a single out right now that's like a big single and mostly making its money on performance on radio, you're not making a living. So, basically a lot of these kids who are young and starting out who haven't made a dime writing songs yet, maybe got their first publishing deal and, have 3 years essentially of a runway, maybe less on the advance that they've gotten if they live really, 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 simply. They basically have that time to shoot and get a radio hit. And if you don't, then your career is pretty much over. And beyond that, even if you do get a radio hit, the fact is there are so many things that can go wrong with registration and, getting a lot of that stuff right, that if, say, year 2 comes around, you wrote a song in year 1, finally year 2 comes around, a year later, you're starting to expect to see some income from those songs. You go to your mailbox and you see that there's no check there. So you call your publisher and you say, what happened? And they go, oh no, there's a mismatch registration, or there's double registration, or there's something wrong. And then the process to remedy that is it's a disaster. It takes years and years and years. So it's a really difficult time, for sure.
We know that there's a lack of information for young creators when it comes to mechanicals, but that's obviously a big part of why we're here today. But there are some other barriers to discuss. I think, Reagan, maybe you.
Yeah, I think when we connect this to the picture of what the Music Modernization Act is supposed to do and what the Mechanical Licensing Collective is supposed to do, if someone is unmatched, they're supposed to be able to come forward. And if this is just focused on mechanicals, which already on the songwriting side, this is a stark picture, is that going to be a barrier to getting people who are not already getting paid incentivized to participate in this?
I mean, I don't think so, because I think, like I said, the pie is so small that songwriters they want every form of income that they can get. So if they know that it's out there and how to get it, they're going to get it, and they want to get it. And I think that knowing that pie potentially could increase over time, and that music is being consumed at higher and higher rates every year in terms of general consumption, that this could get better over time. And I think it's just people having the knowledge of how to go do it, especially if you're independent. Because right now, if you don't have a publishing deal, correct me if I'm wrong, it's pretty hard to collect your mechanicals. I've never released a song, outside of my having a publishing deal, but, I think that's an issue that needs to be addressed more so, is like just allowing people to, A, know that those mechanicals are out there to be collected, and B, how to do it in a simple and concise way.
So I mean, the rate for mechanicals is set in a compulsory license.
Right, of
that
course.
can be adjusted every 5 years.
Yeah.
So, like you mentioned, planting a garden, it's something that can grow as streaming grows. I mean, do you think there's a movement to get buy-in now as the industry starts to move more towards streaming?
That's why we're here today, right? But
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah, I think it's important to dovetail on what he's saying and to touch on what you asked previously. I think we have to recalibrate the way they're looking at this. We have to get them to see that there's money being left on the table, and not look at the streaming platforms as a system of metrics that they're looking at to see where am I polling best in terms of touring, and let me really worry about how I'm going to play these venues and these shows, and that's how I'm making my money. You have to really look at the way the streaming services are empowering artists. They're presenting this idea that it's a tool to empower you to better understand your data, as opposed to letting them see that this is really about economic empowerment, and having them see that there are issues that exist within the platforms and the current business model, that they are not indoctrinated and therefore don't know that there is a lot of money being left on the table. So I guess looking at the problem moving forward, things like compulsory licenses and things of that nature being inclusive in this dialogue is something that can perhaps help, and put the onus back on everyone else, all of the stakeholders, to help alleviate the stress the artist is feeling, or the creators are feeling, when they have to fend for themselves out here and not really knowing the proper way to navigate it.
I think it's worth restating, something that Alex touched on too, is that the onus shouldn't be entirely on the songwriter to know that they have money and how to collect it. I mean, it's a completely obtuse, labyrinthine kind of process to find it. And not everybody is Taylor Swift and has a team of lawyers who can keep looking for her money to get it for them. And, $2,000 to a struggling songwriter, that's significant. You have to remember we're all freelance. We don't get health insurance through our company. We have to pay our expenses just like anyone else. And these young songwriters, as a songwriter, and that's what I was when I started out, and thinking it was a very noble profession and proud of my work. And they are too, this younger generation, and they deserve to be compensated for it.
This is sort of to everybody, but are there other barriers that you foresee that might preclude songwriters and independent publishers from claiming their works through this portal? For instance, if the data requirements are very detailed, or if the user interface is not friendly.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's key. You look at how when you're trying to upload music, the process on a lot of these different aggregators or distributors is pretty simple. You know where your name goes, you know where the name of your song goes, you know who mixed it. In some cases, they actually have those fields where you can input credit. And it's a pretty straightforward process where in 30 minutes you can upload a song. A lot of these platforms also have mobile apps. Most artists that I interact with are really attuned to a digitized, on-the-go mentality. They're untethered from laptops and desktops, and everything they do on their phone. So I think when you talk about creating a portal, it has to be something that is really attuned to how creators are creating, and it has to be something that's nimble. Anything encumbered with a lot of details or anything that could make them feel that this is too academic or too administrative, because quite frankly, a lot of them are wearing many hats. And an administrative hat is the one you like the least, so it has to be something that still makes them feel like they're a creator and they're being empowered in another aspect of their creativity. So that portal has to be something that will speak to that artist who doesn't really understand a lot of the legal jargon and things of that nature.
Yeah, we worry about UI in everything. UI is such a huge part of anything that's involved in tech. So, I think it needs to be a consideration in anything. And in terms of just registering music, because it's an administrative thing, doesn't mean that we shouldn't have equal consideration of, the user interface and how easy that is to use. I know even for me, and I'm the oldest person in almost every room that I work in. I'm serious. I'm not joking.
Really
my sessions are mostly, 19, 20-year-old kids. And some of them are making some of the most moving and powerful music that is being consumed. And I don't have a printer in my house, you know what I mean? And these kids certainly don't have a printer. So if we need hard copy signatures on things, they're not getting done. It's just never going to happen. So, the idea is we have to find a way to do this. Like he said, totally on the move. It's got to be click, click, click. I have my information already set up. One button, boom, let's go.
All right. So since you brought up age, I have to take that. Okay. So it's easy for you guys to upload a song through a portal, and you know what to do and everything. And I'm fairly tech savvy for someone of my generation. I still have to ask my son, how do I make a playlist on that? How do you drag this there? What do you upload there? So I know plenty of songwriters older than me who do not do that.
Right.
Who are not digital natives, none of us, and they have problems with that. They also deserve to be paid.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
These guys are sitting in a room writing songs all day, making a demo tape, sending it out for someone to record, and assuming they'll get paid for it if the song gets recorded. Not many albums sell 5-10 million anymore where you can depend on that income. That doesn't happen anymore.
Sure. So obviously we have a data problem in the music industry, and that's why we're here. Whether it's matching data across platforms or getting data right near the moment of creation, we're faced with some really big challenges. Ivan and Alex, from a producer-writer perspective, what are some realities that are challenging from your standpoint when it comes to capturing that information, from song splits on the musical work side to attribution for musicians? And when are you having those conversations typically?
Well, that's a problem we've all been dealing with at the Recording Academy, where I sit on the board of trustees and I co-chair the producers and engineers wing, and this has been an initiative of ours for the past 10 years. We've been struggling with how to properly gather credits, how to properly gather data. We've partnered with many organizations. DDEX is one of them that we work with, in terms of being able to trying to figure out a solution and alleviate these issues. Because quite frankly, when you're in the creative process and you're caught up in the creative rapture, the last thing you're thinking about is, let me gather this data, let me gather these data points, let me figure out who's writing what and who's producing what in terms of splits. We're not thinking about that. So, and then the way that we work, we're mobile. Everyone has their own rig. Sometimes people are working on the songs until it's time to release these songs. And in many instances, as we were talking about earlier, it could be a year from now. And the memory could get a bit hazy. So when you're talking about independent artists, it's a little bit more like the startup mentality. They tend to be a bit fair with each other and split everything evenly. And you even said they split masters. When you're talking about labels, that's where it gets a little bit tougher. But the Recording Academy is a strong advocate for creating naming conventions, creating recommendations on how to gather data, how to collect this data, how to properly credit, and we have several partners that we deal with also, like Soundwaves has a plugin called Sound Credit. Viva Sound has one called, I forgot what, Studio Collection. I forgot what it's called. I don't want to quote the plugin wrong, but these are companies that exist to help facilitate the gathering of the data. And something that I'm really feel strongly about, digital audio workstations, which are called DAWs, is what we use to record a lot of our music. You have Pro Tools, Logic, Ableton Live, et cetera, et cetera. I think there should be a process that forces these manufacturers to include some of these technologies and allow you to embed XML files into one proprietary format that can probably travel downstream with the file, so that when it goes to the next person, all they have to do is import this track, and then automatically the file gets loaded onto that track, and then as it goes to the next subsequent person, you're gathering more data and more data as it goes downstream, so that when you do finally send the final master out, it has all of the information that you need. This would be the same thing as licensing an MP3 codec that exists on all of these different digital audio workstations, but it has to be something that will have to have buy-in from many stakeholders so that they can find a solution to this common problem.
Yeah, I mean, even to me, like, even if we are super conscientious about at every stage of the process, even days after a session, gathering the information and trying to do splits right away, things like that, which isn't ideal from a creative perspective, but it's something that I suppose could happen. The issue is that sometimes this music changes hands, like you said, 3 or 4 times before release. So say I start an idea at my house one day, and I'm doing it with 2 co-writers. And then Ivan has a session with Roseanne 2 days later, and I'm like, hey, that'd be perfect for them to work on. So I send it to Ivan. I'm not even in the room. He has no idea who I made the idea with. All I know is I just sent him something really amazing, and they're going to finish it. So say they finish it, and an artist cuts this song. So they send it to Dua Lipa. She goes, hey, I got my next single. Amazing. We're all stoked. He calls me. He says, we got a single. She maybe brings in a producer to work on it from her team.
Diplo?
Sure, Diplo's in on it. Great. And then like maybe there's somebody else working on it, and then there's a release date set, right, by the label. And we're working up until the release date to get this out, and they hit us 3 days before saying we need these producer agreements signed and splits. And so what happens is they're not going to push that release date back because they've set up all this marketing. Everything is all in concert with that release. And so then it's like there's a scramble to get these credits together, and if we have to turn them in as like at the time of release correctly, I mean, the chances of an error happening are super large, because Ivan's manager may call him and say, hey, are you cool with 20% on this? And he's going to be like, great. My manager may call me and say, are you cool with 22% on this? I'm going to say, great, because I'm assuming everybody's being communicated to. They're not asking me about everybody else's split. They're just saying, are you cool with this? And so that's a little bit of a communication problem, but it's because like oftentimes we're forced to rush these things so quickly, and that they're being worked on in parcel. So it's very difficult to do this really quickly right at the end when there's a release date coming.
And to me, that to me is it's endemic of what the music industry has become. I think, like you spoke earlier, when sessions would happen, and when I first got into the industry, we were all in the studio working, and the final record that we wrote, we were all agreeing, by the end of the night. Now, the way music is worked on, these are the realities of a lot of creators, and that's something that needs to be addressed and be central to, the discussions we're having here.
Definitely. Sort of chime in on that. The USCO, the MLC, and the DLC have got a big job, not only in terms of creating this framework, but also in terms of education and reaching out to the artists so that we ensure that they're paid correctly. And for those of you who have been involved in legal issues that have been that stemmed from data issues, which I'm assuming is all of you at some point. Do you have concerns in regards to how the data is matched and what the recourse will be if that information is incorrect in this framework? And can you speak to how holdups and data issues have affected your daily lives?
Holdups, I think, especially for somebody who's a young songwriter who's just starting, can be absolutely devastating, like career ending. Because if something's like misregistered, and in a lot of cases, it's not transparent, so there's no way for me to just go online and check to see if my song has been registered properly to my name across all of these platforms, even if I know that they're there. And if you're expecting to make that money and then all of a sudden it's just not there and it is your only source of income, you don't really have any recourse. Because if you were to go back, and even if you're right and all the creators agree that those are the right splits and it was just a mistake, a clerical mistake, or there's a mismatched registration, or there's a double registration or something, getting that fixed and getting money credited that's already been paid incorrectly to people will take a lot of time, and rightfully so. To debit somebody is a big deal. You don't want to ask somebody to give money back that they thought was theirs. It's difficult as well. So over that course of year or 2 years of trying to get that money back, what is that 20-year-old kid supposed to do to make a living? They're probably just going to have to go get a job, which is something that's really tough.
Yeah, I think what we're all talking about is transparency. I mean, it just happened to me that I left, I changed PROs a few years ago, and my publisher found a lot of money that my old PRO forgot to pay me. And I started thinking, well, where else is money hiding? Who else forgot to pay me? And I think that happens on a regular basis. If there was, if things were transparent, it would take so much pressure off of musicians and songwriters. At least we would know. And if the system was easy for all of us to get into and check ourselves and not need a team of lawyers to check, and to submit something that was easy, as easy as buying something online, it would change a lot of lives, and particularly young songwriters who they do have career-ending moments, because that $3,000 wasn't paid.
Right, and that they don't deserve either. I mean, the money was theirs. It just was a clerical issue. You know what I mean? And so that's the hardest part, is both from like just a business standpoint and a practical standpoint, but also from an emotional standpoint. You're so excited when you got your first hit. I remember having mine, and I was ecstatic to hear my music on the radio for the first time. Imagine hearing your music on the radio for the first time and it playing for 4 months, and then expecting to get a payday from that, and then it just not being there. That's devastating emotionally. I
know of a young songwriter who a big company just co-opted his song and was using it in an ad. And he said, I didn't know we were supposed to get paid for that. I mean, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah.
Definitely. Do you all think that the possibility that at some point across the spectrum that, be it at the label distributor level or at the digital service provider level, that correct data delivery being compulsory would be helpful or a hindrance, or how do you feel about that idea?
I see, we were talking about this in the green room, and it was a resounding yes, even though this would mean that it's regulation, which some people would look at it as interference. But there are various ways to look at it. One way would be to look at it as this would be the perfect scenario for all of us to ensure that we're properly are going to be credited, and will be the transparency that we're talking about will take place prior to anything having to be agreed upon. Before you even think about setting your release date, all of these different buckets have to be filled. But at the same time, you have to take the pragmatic approach in terms of how the model has drastically changed, where it's about being nimble and being able to put out music, whenever you're trying to put the music out. So it will have to be something where all of the stakeholders will have to agree. Everyone will have to give some buy-in. The artists, the labels, the publishers, us producers and songwriters, because quite frankly, it can turn into a nightmare when you work on a project for a year or two, and they're slow to gather all of these different assets, and now it can't come out because of this regulation that exists that prohibits you from moving forward. I don't know what that conversation is gonna lead into as we get deeper into 2021 when it goes live, but that's something that could alleviate a lot of these issues.
Yeah, I mean, I think in as a concept, it's a great idea. I just think there's serious challenges to putting it in place in practice. A lot of it coming from what I kind of just described with a minute ago with gathering split information before a release, because if you make it compulsory, mandatory to have all that stuff in before a release, like if you're missing certain splits from a certain song, you're not going to tell Drake he can't release his album on December 5th because the splits aren't complete on 2 songs. He's either just going to drop those songs off the record, or the label will probably just submit incomplete splits, assuming that they'll fix it later, because they've spent so much money on the budget to release that album on that date that they're not going to let a regulation hold them up. I mean, producer agreements oftentimes aren't even completed by release dates. They're like,
just produce a deck.
Yeah, right. Anything. So, I mean, these things usually happen, not always, but can happen in the months following. So to make that system maybe a little bit more malleable, where, it's easier to amend data after it's released, or you have a 3-month period after a release where you have to have something in, or that date can be flexible, then I think that that's a better idea. But to have it be before release date is extremely difficult to do in practice.
What we were also talking about in the room is, sometimes they just make you give up. Like, it's so complicated. I mean, a producer I work with, he's been waiting 2 years to be paid on a project because they changed the paperwork after the track was submitted. So this, it's incredibly complex. He keeps resubmitting it. They keep saying, no, you got to do this. Now you got to do this. They assume you'll give up at some point.
I mean, yeah, the music industry has figured out how to take you into deep water and let you go. They're exceptionally talented and gifted at fighting the war of attrition. And like you said, it's really not set up to make it easy for you. So that's why it's something like what we're discussing here could be beneficial to a lot of us. But it's such a nuanced suggestion, and that it requires a lot more conversation, because it could get even uglier and result in a lot of lost wages for a lot of creatives.
Yeah, I mean, I think these problems do exist. I also think that, of course, like anyone in any business, we have some onus on us to be responsible for our own data and our own material. And I don't want to lose that in this discussion. You know what I mean? Because we do have to do that, but there needs to be some sort of uniform way for us to do it. Like, the issue now is that we don't even have any guidelines that I can say to a young songwriter, okay, you're going to release a song this way. This is how it's done. Here's an article on how you go through that process correctly. You want to do it independently. You want to do it through a major label. You want to do it this way. There just aren't there are no resources. If we had the resources, then I'd be absolutely comfortable saying that the onus is on us as creators to take our responsibility in our own job. But the problem is that we just don't have those resources.
To your point, in terms of resources, education is key. The Recording Academy, like I said, without keep plugging the great organization that I belong to, and you also, and Roseanne.
Artist Rights Alliance.
Hey.
So we strongly advocate and educate and talk to people about the importance of credit gathering. I mean, quite frankly, this is your livelihood. This is your equity on what you're creating. So it is the onus is on the creators. You have to actually do your due diligence, do the unsexy, unglamorous work. There's no way around it. I mean, until we come up with, you know, that magic bullet that's going to be the solution to all of our woes, you have to do your due diligence. We all have, we were functioning as de facto record labels. I know record labels have multiple departments that handle all of these different aspects. We have to function like that, and we have to, you know, be willing to wear those hats until that solution, you know, presents itself.
I agree, and to expand on what you said, we're not victims. You know, it may sound like we're just sitting here complaining, but we're not victims. Several years ago, the way I got involved in this is several years ago, John McCrae of the band Cake, I was playing in San Francisco, and he was there. He said, "Can I meet you in the lobby? I want to have a cup of coffee and talk to you." I said, "Sure." And he started by saying, "It's time to grow up. Your money's out there. This is your livelihood's at stake." And that's why I got involved. Like, he's right. I can't just have some vague notion that somebody's going to take care of this for me. You know, it's reality.
In 2014, Roseanne, you spoke to Congress and said that at the time the climate amongst artists was dispirited. Do you feel that that climate is similar now, or is there a shift in the way that artists are?
I think slowly we're realizing that we can empower ourselves in this process. And, you know, we've had the support of the Copyright Office, we've had the support of the Recording Academy and many others. I think that they realize that if we disappear, they disappear. You know, that this is we're bound together. And the digital landscape has complicated things, and in some ways it's been incredibly unfair. You know, the pre-72 issue just strikes at my heart. And I've talked a lot about that how disrespectful it is to legacy artists that they don't make a royalty in the digital realm. And there are a lot of, and someone in the Copyright Office, I think Maria said, you know, we can't even follow the breadcrumbs back to find out how that began, you know? So there's kind of, it's inexplicable, but I believe that we can pull it apart. It may not be in my generation, but it can happen.
Would you all like to speak to your generation, how creators are feeling about speaking up for themselves and participating in events like this, for instance?
Well, people are more active. In my experiences as a creator, I've lobbied in Congress during Grammys on the Hill. I lobby yearly during District Advocate Day, which is a grassroots, one of the largest music grassroots events that we're a part of at the Recording Academy. 2,000 creators all across the country, and people are galvanized and energized because there's a sense of immediacy and urgency, knowing that these issues are dire. We're losing equity at an alarming rate. And I think a lot of younger creators are they don't really grasp it because I don't think it's being couched in a way that speaks to them in a more holistic way. And I think we have to do a better job of showing them that you're part of this ecosystem. Like you said earlier, you know, you may not see the fruits of your labor until much later, but I'm okay with that, right? So we have to look at this ecosystem that we all inhabit, and we have to make sure we do our part. We have to preserve it, even if it's for the next generation, which is what we're doing. But we have to get the next generation to have some onus also and ownership in all of this, and know that this is within your rights to advocate for these issues. When you bring the political aspect, that's when things get a little bit crazy. But I think we all have to do our part in holding each other accountable and being, you know, true stakeholders in this conversation.
Yeah, education is key, like what you were saying, so that they take ownership of, the next generation takes ownership because they're educated and they know what to do. I mean, that's what organizations like Artists' Rights Alliance are doing, is trying to educate young musicians and songwriters.
So I think, you know, the Copyright Office feels strongly that whether it be a study or an educational activity we do, our actions benefit so much from participation from creators, and we want to hear from creators. We started off this morning saying, well, it will just be very easy if we just got all the data at the source, and that sounds great if you're looking at a big chart. And I think this panel just explained how the practicalities make that difficult sometimes. So as we start thinking about the MMA and issues in general, what are the most effective ways, be it the Copyright Office or the MLC, to reach out to creators and songwriters and get them to participate? You've mentioned advocacy organizations. What else?
I mean, I think most young people, at least people younger than me that I work with, the majority of those people are pretty much just paying attention to what young people pay attention to, which is Instagram, Snapchat, TikTok. You know what I mean? Things like that. So, any way we can, make them aware of things that way. I think, inter-community stuff is big. I know in Los Angeles when the MMA was happening, Ross Golan did a ton of work and, made us extremely aware via social media and also just like person to person in sessions of what's going on. And I think a lot of it is just conversations that we have before we start writing every day. So, I think more and more people being aware and then just spreading that word of mouth is probably the easiest way. That I can see, but I think just social media marketing is the way that it works with everything now is the most efficient.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think educating, through someone they admire on a platform that they're on is going to be key.
Totally.
And that's something to consider because even messages of best practices when you're talking about the proper way of recording, people don't want to hear about that. We have an initiative called the Loudness Wars that we're dealing with in terms of levels on the streaming services, and we're having an extremely hard time connecting with the creators on how to fix those things. But you put the right person in front of them that they admire, they listen. So this issue is so close to that issue that I think the onus will be on the Copyright Office to create content that's visually appealing and stimulating and aesthetically connects with that generation, because I think that's what you have to speak to is who they are and where they're going and how it connects with them.
Yeah, I mean, it's tough, but I think frankly, like most kids probably would rather hear it from Pharrell than from an ad from the Copyright Office. You know what I mean? Like not to
Fair enough.
But like that's kind of the truth of the matter. Like people who are young really are not interested in, like anything. Like if you learn math in a math class, you're not going to pay attention. But if somebody who is teaching you how to do something that'll benefit you and you admire is teaching it to you, you'll learn it.
Yeah, very good. This is a multi-generational issue, though. Do you have any feedback on that as well, on how to reach people in your generation?
In my generation, I should say something first about my son's generation. He's 20 and he made his first album last year, and he put it up on Spotify. And I said, and it's also for sale on iTunes. And I said, I'll tell all my friends to buy it from iTunes. He goes, I don't care about that. I just want followers on Spotify. I was going, wow, this is a totally different business than I grew up in, and I still don't. I mean, we still support him, so, like going, okay, that's great. Let's see how that pans out. I'm sorry to my friends at Spotify. But what was the question, Aaron? About my generation.
What are some effective ways to reach people?
Well, this may be throwing a wrench into this whole conversation, but I'm very pro-union, and I've been a union member since 1977. And I think SAG-AFTRA does a good job of education. I think the Musicians Union could do a little better. And I know young people don't join the union, and I was kind of shocked to realize that, and then I kind of got used to it. Oh yeah, okay, they're not. This is not their generation. They don't really believe in that. But I'm still very pro-union, and I think that their education and outreach could be really strong and helpful.
That's key because they fellowship in an entirely different way.
Fellowship. There you go. That's what I'm talking about.
So I think just one way to reach creators is you hear it from your peers, from your role models, from your inspirations. We're running out of time. What do any of you want to tell your fellow songwriters about this study or this project or what they need to know?
Can I curse?
Yes.
Give a shit. Seriously. People have a very lax approach sometimes when it comes to what they're creating. And in so many ways, the music is devalued. And I think unless you care about the music and you can't really understand what's the intrinsic value of what you're creating. Therefore, you leave monies on the table. Therefore, these things that we're talking about here aren't as important as they could be. So I think my message to them would be to care. Just as you care about the nuances and the creative aspect, think about what this does to your legacy and what you're leaving behind, and it can motivate you to be, a lot more proactive in terms of the business structure of what you're creating. So that will be what I will say to them.
I would say that when art and commerce get married, difficulties arise. And that's what's happened. And it's become more complicated as time has gone on because the providers have gotten more numerous. And like you said, a guy can sit in his basement and make a record and put it out and get his 2,000 followers and, be happy with that. But at the same time, you can't make a living that way. And art and music, songwriting, I don't want to see songwriting become like some lost folk art, like divining water with a stick or something. It has to exist. Like I said, we're in the service industry. We open people's hearts. We need that as much as anything else. And you want songwriters to exist. You don't want to just throw syllables on a looped track. You want real songwriting to exist. So we need education, we need support from those in commerce, and we need community.
I mean, I think that pretty much sums it up. Beyond the fact that I think to all of like the young creators, I would just say that keep creating, keep being amazing, and just understand that there are people working on this and that they can contribute whatever and however they want to, that the channels of conversation are open. So that's pretty much it.
Thank you so much to the
Thank you.
Copyright Office, and thank you so much, panelists, for being here.
Thank you, Reagan.
Thanks
Thank
for having
you
us.
all.